what happened in the Gulf, like something, the pipeline opens up and starts gushing out.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And it would help, like Montana actually has a lot of good state regulations. And so they were able to reroute the potential new pipeline that might come through their state to make sure that it didn't affect wildlife reserves and kind of water that they didn't want the pipeline coming near. And because we don't have those regulations, we weren't able as a state to offer up alternative routes. And so there's lots of things that our state can do to make sure that we're safe and that our land and our water are protected.
So is it possible still that, we could get these regulations in and, obviously we don't want the pipeline to come in anyway, but if there is one that comes in down the roads for whatever reason, I mean, obviously we don't want any pipelines, but we would be able to kind of manipulate where the pipeline would be laid instead of just wherever TransCanada or whatever oil company decides to put it.
Yes, that's absolutely right. And so that's exactly why we need some state regulations to protect us from the current pipeline that's in the ground. And, if unfortunately another pipeline down the road does get approved, that we are safe with that new proposed pipeline as well.
And so then with the current Keystone, not the Keystone XL, but the current one, Keystone, if that thing opened up, what would happen right now, like today?
We're really concerned not only for the oil. The oil is really thick and dense, and so that's already concerning because it will just sink to the bottom of the Ogallala Aquifer. And 85% of us get our drinking water from that source of water. So it is really concerning, one, about the oil, but two, the more concerning thing is all the chemicals that is used. So they really have to use, essentially, the only way to describe it is like an industrial form of paint thinner. In order to make it liquid enough to flow through the pipe because it is so thick and dense. So when a leak happens, that stuff leaks out too. That's what we're really concerned about because that has all of the chemicals in it that are definitely linked to cancer. And the tribal folks who live around where they are kind of producing this oil and then pushing it through the pipelines, they've already seen increased rates of cancer. We know it's dangerous. There have been plenty of studies to show us. Our common sense shows us. We didn't even need to have a study. Our common sense tells us if there's chemicals in the water, that's a bad deal. So it's a big concern.
Yeah. So the oil that's going through the current Keystone pipeline is typical crude oil, correct?
No, it's a tar sand oil too.
It is a tar sand oil. So
yep.
This is then going to be, and that's a very dirty type of oil, correct? Could you tell me a little bit more about what tar sand oil is?
Yeah. So tar sand oil is this really thick form of oil. The name really describes it very well. It looks like a combination of black tar and sand. So it's grainy, it's thick, it's dense, and it's very gooey. And so this is the stuff that they're digging up in Canada and really destroying a lot of their forest and their tribal land. And they're, bringing out this oil and then pumping it through the pipes with all the chemicals. And so they have, all of the economic studies that show, normally for a gallon of oil or a barrel of oil, it's about $5 to produce versus, about $180 for tar sands. It takes a lot of money, a lot of resources to produce. But since there's little regulations in Canada on it, they do it because they can still make money on it. So the other big problem with it is that it produces more greenhouse gas emissions than normal oil production does. So, we're definitely not a group who says we don't need oil. We know that our country relies on oil. We hope that that continues to decrease as we bring in more alternative fuels and more energy efficiency programs. But we don't have to rely on tar sands oil. That's our point.
Yeah, it sounds like this tar sand oil, is 21 times more energy to get it than typical crude, from what I'm hearing. Is that correct?
That's right. And so that is something that has been brought up. Actually, the EPA released their letter that they submitted to the Department of State yesterday, and it was exactly one of the concerns that they brought up. There are already regulations on the books that essentially say you can't sell a form of energy that requires more energy to produce. And this tar sands falls under that category. So the EPA is going after the pipeline, this tar sands pipeline, with that ruling, hoping that they can help stop it.
What exactly is needed in terms of like, what does a tar sand mine or a pumping station or whatever it is, what does that look like? What exactly does that do to the land that that is exploited because of that?
If you go on a website, plainsjustice.org, or if you Google even just, tar sand pictures, you will see essentially multi-story level trucks that are just digging up the ground, cutting down the trees. It leaves this kind of, they call it oil ponds. It leaves these oil ponds, which the Canadian government just won a case against TransCanada and several other oil companies because the ducks from up above think that it's water, but it's really oil. And so they were killing thousands of ducks with these oil ponds. So it's not only cutting down our forests, which we know protects us from green gas emissions, it is also killing our ducks and killing our wildlife. And so you should really definitely Google or go on Plains Justice website, and you will see the images that will really hit home and make this a good picture for you.
Yeah, we'll make sure that we put that on our blog, the www.earth2lincoln.blogspot.com, and there'll be a link to that. Also, there'll be a link to boldnebraska.org, and you can check that out. If you just tuned in, you're listening to Earth to Lincoln Radio. Earth to Lincoln Radio is an environmental talk show every Monday at 6 p.m. here on KZUM. I'm talking to Jane Kleeb of boldnebraska.org, and we're talking about the TransCanada pipeline that is being proposed by TransCanada, and it will come straight through Nebraska and above the Ogallala Aquifer, possibly making threatening the water and threatening 80% of the people in Nebraska that use it. So where will the pipeline be in Nebraska?
It is essentially really go from, it'll go through the Sandhills and kind of through the York area, and then, further down into Kansas. So it's really affecting, more of the ground that, we protect so dearly for lots of reasons, right? A lot of our ancestors homesteaded land out there. It's obviously where a lot of our cattle are, which is obviously one of the, number one economy drivers in our state. And so it's really going through some fragile part of our state.
Is there a possibility that this could affect the cranes at all?
Yes. So I'm glad that you brought that up. It not only affects the migration of the cranes, it also affects the whooping cranes. And, there's about, which is, almost an extinct animal, there's about 400 of them left. And they essentially go up in northern Canada where the production of this tar sands is happening. And they've begun to see some changes that these birds are having to make in their patterns, which is affecting essentially their entire kind of, southern migration. And so there's National Wildlife Federation is in the middle of doing a study to really show the impacts that it's currently having and to show the impacts of what's going to happen, several years down the road if we continue to do this.
So have you talked to any property owners here in Nebraska that the pipeline will be affecting, and what is your feel on how they're responding to this pipeline? I mean, are there any benefits to them? Or are there, are their concerns outweighing really what they think is a benefit?
We have talked to a lot of landowners, and we also went to all the public hearings and listened to the landowners at the public hearings as well. And not one landowner stood up and said that they were in support of the pipeline. In fact, at all three of the hearings, not one Nebraskan stood up and said that they were in support of the pipeline. Only one person did stand up in support of the pipeline, and he was a welder from Arkansas, which had the contract from the last pipeline. So, there were some clear economic reasons of why he was there and in support of the pipeline. And so the landowners, they have a couple concerns. One, ranchers and farmers are I always say that they're our first environmentalists. They were an environmentalist before we invented the word. They live off the land, and their whole economic activity is wrapped up in the land. And so they are concerned about the environmental impacts. Landowners are also concerned about money.